Once upon a time, there was an elderly man named Cornelius, and he was a mysterious man in the neighborhood, and he would often go on these long walks, and he didn't seem like he was walking anywhere. He was just walking for the sake of walking to get exercise. He would literally stop and smell the roses. If there was a dog or a cat, he would stop and pet it. He was friendly. He would say hello to everyone. Nobody actually knew where Cornelius lived. He was just always in this neighborhood, and nobody really got to know him. Well, one of the things that Cornelius liked to do was he liked to pick through people's trash. And everyone thought that that was kind of gross in the neighborhood because trash is generally smelly. It's full of coffee grounds and chicken bones and orange peels if you don't compost. All sorts of nasty things that are decomposing and rotting in the hot sun inside these plastic bins. But those things didn't seem to bother Cornelius, because inevitably he would find one thing every day in a trash bin that he felt was worth keeping. So one day, it was a rainy day, he put on his parka, he went out for his walk, as he always did. He said hello to the folks passing by. He petted a cat, he petted a dog, and he stopped at a particular trash bin. And he opened it. And inside, he found
a small, jagged corner of a mirror that had been shattered. And he looked at that small little piece of mirror, and he saw his reflection in it. But his reflection looked like Cornelius when he was a young man. So he shut the lid right away. What was that? Cornelius thought to himself. And he looked up at the house, and the house had boards on the windows. In the rain, it looked a little bit spooky. It looked like no one had lived there for years. The gutters were hanging off. There was a sign that said no trespassing. The garden was overgrown. And so Cornelius, standing there in the rain, in front of a trash can, in front of an old home, shook the water off himself and thought, I must have been dreaming. And he opened the lid to the trash can again, and he reached down inside and grabbed that little shard of mirror and held it up in the rain and looked inside of it. And there was his reflection again. But instead of the old man Cornelius, it was the Cornelius of his youth. And Cornelius stared into the blue eyes of that young man, and the young man in the mirror said, Cornelius O'Boyle, so nice to see you. I've missed you. Cornelius put the shard inside his jacket. He couldn't believe what he had just seen and heard. Was that little piece of mirror talking to him? He needed to go home and take a nap. He was sure there was something wrong with him, so Cornelius tucked the little piece of mirror into his breast pocket, zipped up his parka, and started walking quickly home. But as he was walking, he thought he heard something on the wind, the breeze, something that sounded like a name or a voice he remembered from his childhood. He looked over his shoulder at the house. On the second floor in the window, he thought he saw something. He looked a little closer, and he saw
a dog in the window. And it wasn't any ordinary dog. It was his childhood dog, named Wolfenstein. And Wolfenstein was a beautiful husky. Looked like a wolf. That's why they called him Wolfenstein. And he was sure of it. It wasn't another dog. I mean, these huskies tend to all look alike, but he knew just by the way that Wolfenstein was looking at him that it was his childhood dog, and he was stunned. He was a little bit scared, but he was more curious than scared. And he approached the house, And as he approached that old, boarded-up house, it started to renew itself. Every step he took on the broken concrete healed beneath his feet and became whole again. Every overgrown bush and weed turned into a finely manicured bush, and the weeds were gone. It was like Dorothy walking into Oz for the first time. It was vivid color. The house was alive. The rain had stopped, and there were birds chirping, and the paint had been restored to its original color. It was a bright yellow, and the shutters were a crisp white, and Wolfenstein from the top window started barking at him as he got closer and closer to the house. And he looked around, and he turned around completely to look at the rest of the neighborhood, and the entire neighborhood had changed. It was his childhood home. It was his childhood memory. He was not in the year 2023. He caught his reflection in the front window and saw that young, blue-eyed Cornelius. And he looked down at his hands, and these were not the hands of an old man. These were the hands of a young man. And he felt his arms. They weren't flabby anymore. They weren't old and victims of gravity, just drooping to the ground. They were strong, young arms. And he opened the door, and when he walked inside, he saw
a book of fairy tales that he used to read every night before bed, sitting on the staircase right in front of him. He darted over to the staircase where the book was sitting. He was transported back to all the stories he used to read at night. Stories of princes, stories of paupers, stories of witches, stories of monsters, stories of wolves. And Wolfenstein, his dog, came running up to him and lapping him. And he realized that he was a 10-year-old boy again. And so he tucked the book under his arm and he ran up and down the stairs as fast as he could. It felt so good to be a young boy again. He started running all over the house, doing all the things he wasn't allowed to do when he was a little kid. He started jumping on the couch. Once he finished jumping on the couch, he ran upstairs and started jumping on the bed. He just had so much energy he wanted to get out. He ran downstairs to the kitchen. He opened all the cupboards. He found a box of cereal from when he was a kid that he was never allowed to eat. He opened it up and he poured himself a bowl. All the food was fresh. He cut some strawberries, put it on top of that cereal, and had about 5 bowls of it. Then he went out back in his backyard and he saw all of his old toys. He grabbed his shovel and he started digging and made a little hole in the ground, built a little fort around it, grabbed some blankets from the bed and dragged them out there, and he and Wolfenstein created a little dugout for themselves where they sat and read the book. And as happens to 10-year-old boys, as they read, they start to get a little sleepy, especially with 5 bowls of cereal in their belly. And he just got more tired, and he couldn't keep his eyes open. And he decided he was going to take a little nap right there in his new little dugout fort. So he rolled over on Wolfenstein, and as he was rolling over, he felt something in his breast pocket. He realized he was leaning on something sharp. It kind of hurt his chest. And when he rolled back over, he pulled out a small shard of mirror. And in that mirror were the same blue eyes of his, but it was a much older man. And he said, "Cornelius, it was so nice to see you again, but it's time to go home." And 10-year-old Cornelius was spooked by this. What was that? He put it back in his pocket. And as he did so, he could feel something change on the wind. It started to drizzle again. He thought, "I better go back inside." And he went in the house. The rain started to pick up. And then he started looking out at the front, and he saw the trash can out there. He thought, "Oh, I better put this piece of trash back in the trash can." And as he left the house, he closed the door behind him because he didn't want the rain and the wind to get in. He looked down at his hand, and right there before his eyes, his hand started to change. It started to get wrinkly and spotty. and a little fatter, a little older, and a little saggier. He thought, boy, that's strange. And he decided to keep on going to the trash can to throw out this jagged piece of mirror that had just spoke to him, because he didn't want to see that anymore. He lifted the lid of the trash can and he threw it in it. As he closed the trash can, he looked back up at the house, and oddly, the house was all boarded up again. And it was raining, and he was in a parka, and he was an old man. And Cornelius, the old man, closed the trash can lid, left the mirror inside, and started walking away in the rain. But he felt an inner peace as he left. He felt like everything was okay. He felt like how good it was to remember what it was to be a little boy, and how good it feels to live in good memories. The end. Once upon a time, there was a little white rabbit named Willow Hopper. And Willow Hopper lived in a house with a family. Willow Hopper was a kept rabbit. Willow Hopper was a part of the House Rabbit Society, a society of rabbits who lived with humans and was provided for by humans, and very rarely had to bite humans because the humans would always feed him. But Willow Rabbit used to stare out the back window of this house where he lived with the humans in the House Rabbit Society, and he would long for the days when he used to hop among the willows down by the river. He could see the high grass calling to him from that windowsill where he used to perch himself. And it's not that he didn't have a good life or that he didn't love his family. In fact, he loved his family a lot. Every morning they'd give him pellets in his cage when he woke up. Every night they put hay down for him to make a little bed for himself in his hutch. When the kids used to go off to school in the morning, he could count on the dad to throw him a few little pieces of apple that he'd left over from their lunch boxes. And at night when they came home, he could count on the mom when she was making dinner to throw down a few pieces of lettuce from the salad she was making. But still, the call of the willows was getting to him. And during the day, when the family wasn't at home, he used to sit by that window and think, gosh, I wonder what it would be like. I wonder what it would be like to go back out into the world. So Willow, the rabbit, began to look for an opportunity to escape from his house and his family, to see what he could see in the great wide world down there waiting for him. Lucky for Willow, he lived with a very ill-behaved canine. There was a dog in the family, and that dog didn't follow the rules. Willow knew that he was a lesser species, knew that he was a lesser animal, knew that that dog was going to be his ticket out of this place. So Willow one day decided to create a little trap for the dog, whose name was Felicity. Felicity used to run full steam at things, and there was a certain gate that used to keep Willow in off the deck and out into the backyard. And Willow devised a plan that was going to send Felicity right through that gate and send him back out into the willows that were calling. So Willow devised a plan. Willow got himself covered in hay. He just rolled around in a bunch of water in his cage and wallowed in it. And then he rolled around in a bunch of hay to make himself look like a different kind of animal. And the hay was sticking to him, and he knew that this dog wasn't that sharp and wasn't that smart. So he waited for the dog to fall asleep, and then he completely disguised himself as a whole nother animal covered in hay and fur and pellets. And he looked like something unrecognizable, and he knew this was going to make Felicity crazy when she woke up from her nap. So Willow positioned himself right by that gate and started to thump his foot, which is what rabbits do when they're in danger or they're unhappy. So Willow thumped his foot 3 times. Felicity's eyes opened, and what she saw in front of her was not the rabbit that she knew. It was a furry, crazy, hairy, straw-covered little chipmunk in Felicity's mind. So Felicity ran full steam at that little crazy animal that was sitting there, and right when Felicity got almost up to Willow in his mask, Willow hopped about 4 or 5 feet in the air. He had an unbelievable vertical leap, as rabbits do. Right over Felicity's head. Felicity went right through the gate and knocked it over. Now there was nothing between Willow and his grand adventure holding him back anymore. The gate was down, and Felicity was all tangled in it, and just like that, Willow shot out into the yard, into the high grass, and disappeared. He went back under the hedges, into the bushes, and everything smelled so fresh and so alive. It had been so long since he'd been outside in the wild. Everything was his for the taking. He started eating the grass and the clover and the rose bushes and the hedges. Oh, he was so happy to be tasting all those fresh greens again, instead of waiting for the food that the humans left him or the pellets that they gave him in the morning. He found a soft, dry patch of dirt and he started pawing in it, digging it. He made himself a little hole in the ground and snuck right in there and rolled around in there and felt like $1,000,000. When Willow's family came home, they saw Felicity all tangled up in the gate, and the gate knocked over, and Willow was nowhere to be seen. Well, they were really, really upset. They started screaming for him, "Willow, Willow Rabbit, where are you? Willow, where are you? Willow, come home." But Willow was long gone. He had already shot down into the canyon behind their house and was hopping around and trying to find other rabbits to say hi to or other animals that he could play with. But he was going to get tired eventually. And while Willow was an adventurous soul, he also really liked his hutch that he slept in every night. He'd gotten comfortable there. The hay was nice. The food was pretty good in the morning. So he was hopping around looking for adventure and excitement. And he had the time of his life. He found little nooks and crannies. He found old logs hollowed out that he could go into. He found a dry creek bed that he hopped around in. And he found a lot of really, really nice cabbage and kale and radishes in a neighbor's yard that they'd been growing for months and months and months. He had Swiss chard. He had all the fancy things that people grow in their backyards. He ate them until he couldn't eat anymore. And then the sun started to set. And Willow thought, maybe I'd like to go home before I go any further. I need to get a good night's sleep before I head back out here into the willows. So I'm gonna hop on back home. And he hopped out of the canyon, and he hopped through the neighbor's garden, and he hopped back into his own backyard, where he saw his human family on the deck, calling out to him. All the boys were holding blueberries and strawberries and his favorite food, waving them in the air. The mom was shaking a bag of pellets, and the dad was pacing around on his cell phone, saying things like, "Well, we know he was in our backyard till about 3 o'clock. If you see a little white rabbit, could you please just call us or just keep him in your sight, because we'd be lost without him." And then Willow just hopped out of the bushes into the backyard, and the kids screamed, "There's Willow! There he is!" And they all ran over to him, and Willow started running around the yard, hopping as fast as he could. And Willow was fast. Rabbits are quick. He was moving. There was no chance the boys were going to catch him. He was running in a circle, and the boys were running after him, waving the food at him. But that's when Felicity really proved her worth. She started to chase that rabbit, and she was as fast as him. Now, dogs and rabbits are natural enemies. Dogs are predators, and rabbits are prey animals. So the dog was tapping into some deep canine powers and chasing that rabbit down. And that rabbit knew that he couldn't trust the dog completely, and he better go back into the house and get into his hutch where he was safe. So he split just as fast as a jackrabbit, back into the house, back up the deck, past his family, through the gate that was waiting to be put back up, in the door, right into his hutch, and ran upstairs in the hutch, safe at last back in his hutch. The dog was barking at the door to the hutch, but Willow was safe upstairs in his little rabbit house. And he was glad to be home, because while the great wide world was a lot of fun for him, it's also really nice to come home when you are a house rabbit and a member of the House Rabbit Society, he realized he had it pretty good. And the family put the gate back up, and they put Felicity back into her room, and they closed him up, and they gave him some hay, and they gave him some more pellets, and they put a strawberry and a blueberry into his hutch for him to enjoy that night. And Willow Hopper, the rabbit, decided, I think I'm going to stay in my house for a while. I've got it pretty good here. And he closed his eyes and went to sleep. The end.
Once upon a time, there was a ladybug named Bertha. And Bertha did not live in the trees like most ladybugs did, or on bushes, wherever you would find ladybugs out in the wild. Bertha was a pet ladybug for a little girl named Maggie. And Maggie loved Bertha. She treated Bertha like the family dog. She had Bertha in this little plastic case with ventilation, and it was almost like a hamster cage. Like water would trickle down for Bertha to drink when she got thirsty, and Maggie would bring in food for Bertha, whatever Bertha liked to eat. I actually don't know what ladybugs like to eat, maybe smaller insects, bits of grass. Every year, they would celebrate Bertha's birthday, and nobody really knew when she was born. It was just the day that Maggie got Bertha. And this ladybug, Bertha, had lived for a long time. I don't know the general lifespan of ladybugs, but Maggie had Bertha for at least a year now. And Maggie was a 10-year-old girl, and she lived in a small apartment in the city, and so they couldn't have a dog. Her father was allergic to cats. So Bertha was her entire world. So they would go out for bagels in the morning down the street at their favorite bagel shop, and Maggie would insist on bringing Bertha. And everyone in their neighborhood knew Maggie and knew Bertha, and it was always a joy when they would go into these little shops or these little restaurants, because the wait staff or the people that worked at the store would always fawn all over Bertha. One day, Maggie woke up and went to feed Bertha her grass breakfast, and she noticed that something was a little different about Bertha.
And she thought, did Bertha always have 8 spots? I thought Bertha had 7 spots. And she looked closer and closer, and she was digging through her memory, and she knows she's obsessed with Bertha, so she has so much love for this bug that there's no way that she's confusing Bertha for a different bug. But this Bertha has 8 spots. And so she went, and Maggie asked her mom and said, can ladybugs add spots overnight? And her mom thought about it a long time, trying to figure out what just happened there, and said, yes, they can. Don't worry, Bertha is just fine. But Maggie was a very smart young girl and still had suspicions. She knew that sometimes adults told her things that weren't true in order not to upset her. But she wasn't upset, she just wanted the answer. And so she goes back to the little enclosure, and she says, Bertha, I need you to tell me if you're still you. And Bertha, of course, doesn't respond. It's just a ladybug for now. And so Maggie's a little disturbed, but decides to take Bertha out for her birthday, because this was the day of her birthday, I think we said. And so she takes her to the bagel shop, and everybody fawns over Bertha, but even the person at the bagel shop noticed something. What's going on here? Is that Bertha? Did you get a different bug? And Maggie says, no, this is Bertha. She just changed her spots. Person at the bagel shop says, okay. Are you sure that bugs can do that? And she says, my mom says so. And the person at the bagel shop, your mom says so. Okay. Well, goodbye, Bertha. Enjoy your bagel. Have a really good birthday. But the person at the bagel shop gets really quiet, kind of just keeps on looking at that enclosure and wondering. And Bertha starts flying around in the enclosure as they start to exit the bagel shop, hitting the walls, as if Bertha doesn't know they're there. Bang, 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 bang. And Maggie's worrying that Bertha's going to hurt herself, but she doesn't. She just keeps on hitting these plastic walls, and Maggie doesn't quite know what to do.
So with the knowledge that Bertha seems to have a different number of spots than she did prior, and that everyone's kind of noticing it, and that Bertha, she's a ladybug, so she's always flown messy, but she usually was spatially aware of environments that she was familiar with, like the bagel shop. So there's this mystery afoot, and little Maggie starts wondering. She's like, did someone swap out Bertha with a different ladybug? Is this Bertha an imposter? Has this Bertha done something with the Bertha that she loved so much and is deceiving her in some way? And so she goes back to her mother, and she presents her mother with these ideas. And her mother says, Maggie, have you spoken to Bertha about this? And Maggie's like, oh my gosh, no, I've just been sort of building this whole narrative in my head, and I haven't even asked Bertha. I mean, like, maybe if we just talked, I would just know if she was like a different Bertha. If this is like an invasion of the body snatchers type thing, or maybe this is an alien ladybug that came in and has possessed Bertha to take over the planet, or maybe this is a demon that has possessed Bertha, or maybe this is a ill-intentioned fellow ladybug who has stolen Bertha's identity, or maybe it's something else entirely. So Maggie sits down with Bertha, and they have some tea, and Maggie's like, Bertha, are you really my Bertha, the one that I've loved for a year? And Bertha thinks about this for a while, and she finally speaks, and lo and behold, it is Bertha's voice. It's unmistakable. This is still Bertha. And Bertha's like, hey, I am so sorry. I think that what's been going on is we haven't been communicating very much lately, and I'm so happy that you asked me to talk, because communication is such a key thing in relationships and talking things out. Maggie, you're so wise beyond your years for being 10. And Maggie's like, well, wait, you're only 1. But Bertha's like, yeah, but 1 in ladybug years, that's like 1,000 in human years, obviously. So I'm quite wise. And she's like, Maggie, I'm so happy that we're having this conversation. Again, communication is so key. It's the key to every relationship. As you know, I've always been a very messy flyer. That's why I was kind of not doing great in the bagel shop. She's like, also, I went to a different friend's birthday party. They were a ladybug, and it was a costume party, and we were all dressing up as ladybugs with a different number of spots. And I realize now, if we had just had this conversation, it would have saved you so much stress. And going forward in life, that is the lesson here.
So they continued to talk regularly and check in with each other, because communication is key in any relationship. And Bertha eventually revealed that as much as she loved Maggie, she wanted to be freed, and she wanted to be out in nature with the other ladybugs. And as hard as that was for Maggie to accept, she eventually did. And on her next birthday, she released Bertha into the wild to be with all the other ladybugs. The end.
Billy lived in rural Nebraska, and Billy was a little boy. He didn't have a lot of friends, so he would just often play by himself outside his parents' house, which is this really, really beautiful Victorian home. It's about 200 years old, much older than most homes in America, and not a whole lot around it besides some cornfields and some low mountains, and out towards the edges of the property there is this old cave. And Billy would oftentimes go play inside this cave and capture the various, or not capture, just really admire the wildlife of the cave as it would change through the seasons. Sometimes it was bats, sometimes it was bears. These are really friendly bears. Sometimes it was indie music musicians hanging out in there, playing music for the acoustics and the romance of being in a cave. You once saw, actually, Conor Oberst from Bright Eyes was in this cave, playing his albums all the way through. But Billy, you never knew he was going to find that cave, and there was a certain time of year where there would be spiders, and this was before the bats came in and ate all the spiders for that season, Circle of Life and all that. And one day he goes in, and there's just this gigantic spider, and I'm not even talking like tarantula spider big, or, those famous pictures of those spiders in, I believe it's Iraq. It's like bigger spiders than even that. The spider is, I don't know, like 8 feet tall. It's about 2 feet taller than her dad. Its thorax is just robust, and it has these long legs going down. And it's talking to her, but it's talking to her without moving lips. It's like it's telepathically communicating with her. And it has such a nice, oddly kind voice. She didn't really think a spider would have a voice that nice. And the giant 8-foot spider who's telepathically communicating with her, what she wants is what?
So Billy is terrified of this spider. Every time that the cave had been filled with spiders, she had originally tried to kill them, run away, would only look at them from a distance. She would give all of the benefit of the doubt to everything else in the cave, even Connor Oberst. But then once spiders would pop up, they just elicited immediate terror, and she would run away. But when this gigantic spider named Shelob telepathically communicated with her, she was frozen in place, and that the fear that she felt evaporated because she was able to communicate with it. And it said, "You think you're scared of me? Think about all of my brothers and sisters that these skyscraper-sized monsters constantly come into their dark, cozy homes, tear down their webs, crush us. We're being terrorized by you. What do you think it's like to be a spider? And you think that we're disgusting." And Billy fights against this, can't understand why she's not allowed to be afraid of these icky, creepy, crawly things. And they start to argue telepathically, and Shelob's mental energy gets bigger and brighter and larger, and then suddenly, like a bright flash in her mind, Billy is overwhelmed and all goes white. And then as it settles down, she realizes what she sees is actually, it's like she can see in a panorama in a bunch of different facets, like in little hexagons. And she realizes she can't smell the bat guano in the cave anymore, but she can feel it so well. She can feel it on all 2, 4, 8 of her arms. And then she sees in the panorama herself, Billy, and realizes
that Shelob has given her the gift of Shelob's own point of view. And what Billy learns is that Shelob and all of Shelob's kin, all the other things that appear to be spiders, they just present as being something that would be scary or could potentially, hurt someone in some way, when in reality, Shelob shows Billy that is just her perception of things, that actually they do so many wonderful things for us. I mean, spiders oftentimes defend us from other pests within our home that might inflict some sort of pain on us, and that she was wrong about that. And that she also learns that Shelob is not actually just a giant insect. Shelob is a non-human intelligence that sees things so differently than we see it, and that every spider that she's ever seen was one with Shelob, that they exist as one peaceful consciousness, and that with that, Shelob got to observe what the world could be, imagine what the world could be if we were all like Shelob and Shelob's brothers and sisters all over the world, defending us from other insects that would do us harm.
And Billy, who was once a lonely child and isolated in Nebraska, now felt what it was like to be simultaneously solitary and surrounded by an enormous community at the same time, and learned that sometimes solitude is okay, and sometimes being in a large group of spiders is okay. And she built her first ever web in order to catch a helicopter, and decided that she liked it so much that she wouldn't go back to being a human. And so Billy, which has Shelob in her body, was disowned by her parents because she started acting like a weird spider and eating flies and not talking and trying to crawl on the walls, but gravity works in different ways. And Shelob got to experience the horrors of being human and being stuck in this human body and in our human civilization, the horrors of loneliness, whereas Billy, now in Shelob's body, got to feast on a helicopter, which is something that every child wants to do. The end.